Opa! Wo sind die deutschen Soldaten? Bible, follow my birds.
Among the many colonial battles of the Victorian era, one stands out for being, quite literally, the shortest war ever recorded. The Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896 is officially recognized by Guinness World Records as the shortest war in history, lasting just 38 minutes. Zanzibar, a small island off the East African coast, today forms part of Tanzania. With an area just under 1,000 square miles and a population of around 2 million, the islands might seem insignificant at first glance. But its strategic location has historically made Zanzibar a vital hub of trade, linking Arabia, India, and mainland Africa. Its famous spice plantations produce cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and black pepper, earning Zanzibar the regional nickname, the Spice Islands. However, trade here was not limited to spices. Zanzibar was a crucial center for ivory, ebony, gold, and controversially, the slave trade. That's right, slaves captured from the African mainland were both forced to work the plantations and sold off across Arabia and beyond. The island's cultural and political history is a story of shifting empires and influences. Zanzibar converted largely to Islam sometime in the 10th or 11th century, and the first recorded European contact came in 1498 with Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama. By the early 1500s, the Portuguese had established a foothold, demanding tribute from local rulers and incorporating Zanzibar into their empire. Though their relationship with the locals was distant, it was not openly hostile, and also Catholic missionaries attempted to convert the population, with little success. In 1698, the Portuguese were ousted, and Zanzibar came under the control of the Sultanate of Oman. The island flourished with spice plantations and the slave trade, becoming so prosperous that Sultan Said bin moved his capital from Muscat, Oman, to Zanzibar's Stone Town in 1840. But Zanzibar's importance soon caught the eye of the European powers competing for influence in Africa. By the late 19th century, the British and Germans were locked in a colonial race to expand their East African territories. Britain, seeking to curb the slave trade and secure commercial and naval dominance, steadily increased its influence. Treaties signed under threat of naval blockade forced the sultans to end the slave trade and accept British oversight. By 1890, Zanzibar was officially declared a British protectorate. This agreement gave Britain the right to veto any appointment of future sultans, effectively making Zanzibar a British client state while maintaining the Sultanate as a nominal ruler. At the time, Sultan Bargash bin Said ruled Zanzibar. He was seen as an enlightened and relatively progressive leader who had visited England, acquired steamships, and expanded his mainland territories. Bargash supported British efforts against the slave trade, but in truth, British power had limits. The island's powerful Arab elite resisted reforms that threatened their economic interests, especially slavery, which was still vital for the spice plantations. British Consul General James Reynolds Rod noted the difficulty of governing Zanzibar under these conditions, describing a fragile balance of power. The Sultan faced pressure from local Arab elites opposed to change, while the British struggled to maintain control with a small colonial presence and limited naval resources. The question of succession loomed large when Sultan Bargash fell ill in 1893. According to Islamic tradition, the eldest member of the royal family should inherit the throne. But in Zanzibar, the practice was more fluid and often depended on political power and the support of influential Arab families. Effectively, the candidate with the longest sword won. Bargash's death triggered a succession crisis. His nephew Khalid bin Bargash, an 18-year-old described as truculent by British officials, and Hamad bin Thuwaini, a 40-year-old cousin of high character favored by the British, both claimed the throne. British Consul Rod acted quickly to install Hamad with the backing of Royal Marines. forcing Khalid out by force and imposing conditions on Hamad's rule that limited Zanzibar's autonomy, especially regarding slavery. For 3 years, Sultan Hamad maintained a fragile peace, publicly supporting the British protectorate. However, his sudden death in August 1896 reignited tensions. Rumors swirled that Khalid, the cousin ousted in 1893, had poisoned Hamad to seize power. This time, the situation was different. Khalid quickly rallied around 1,200 troops loyal to him, seized the palace, and declared himself sultan, ignoring British demands to step down. Unlike the previous succession crisis, British diplomats and naval commanders found themselves facing an armed and well-prepared opposition, with Khalid even wielding weapons gifted by the British and Germans. Basil Cave, meanwhile, was doing his own calculations. He sent messages to London, asking for clarification and permission. His concern was clear. If diplomacy failed, could they use military force to resolve the crisis? The answer came swiftly from Lord Salisbury, the British Prime Minister. Yes, use force if necessary. That message landed with a certain finality. By the morning of August 26, the Royal Navy had moved 3 warships into the harbor: HMS St. George, HMS Philomel, and HMS Thrush. Along with a few hundred British Marines and sailors, these ships were an unmistakable signal. Khalid, however, remained undeterred. Through a palace envoy, he delivered a simple, firm response. He would not step down, nor would he lower the red flag. He did not believe the British would fire on the palace. Basil Cave replied with a short message that would soon become part of historical lore. "We do not want to open fire, but unless you do as you are told, we shall certainly do so." With the standoff now official, Cave issued one final ultimatum. Khalid had until 9:00 a.m. on August 27 to vacate the palace. Inside the palace, Khalid stood his ground. He believed the British wouldn't actually go through with it. Maybe they were bluffing, or maybe they didn't want to be the ones to fire first. Either way, the clock was ticking. 9:00 a.m. came. The flag was still flying. At 9:02, the guns opened up. The shelling was fast, loud, and completely one-sided. The British ships, armed with modern naval artillery, pounded the palace from just a few hundred yards offshore. It didn't take long for the defenses to fall apart. The royal yacht was hit and sank in the harbor. Smoke poured from the palace as its walls crumbled. According to some reports, over 500 people were killed or wounded, most of them defending the palace. On the British side, there was one injury. One sailor got hurt when a gun recoiled unexpectedly. And just like that, the fighting was over. The flag was down, and Khalid had vanished. No declaration, no surrender, just 38 or maybe 40 minutes of chaos, depending on who you ask, and then silence. But the war wasn't quite done yet. While the British had knocked the palace down, they hadn't caught the man they came for. When the smoke cleared, the British expected to find Khalid dead or in chains, but instead they found nothing. No sign of the self-declared Sultan. Khalid had slipped out the back door. While British shells tore through the front of the palace, Khalid and a small group of loyalists ducked out through a side entrance and made a break for the German consulate. Just a few blocks away, it was a bold move. The Germans and British were colonial rivals, but this wasn't Berlin or London, it was Zanzibar, and the rules were murkier. Still, the German consulate had a flag of its own, and Khalid hoped that would be enough to keep him safe. And, for the moment, it was. The British demanded the Germans hand him over. The Germans refused. They offered a compromise. Khalid wouldn't be allowed to step foot on any British, or by extension, Zanzibari, soil again. That was enough to avoid a diplomatic disaster. So, late in the night, The Germans smuggled Khalid out of the consulate and onto one of their ships. He was taken south to Dar es Salaam, in what was then German East Africa. He stayed there in exile, far from the throne he claimed for earlier. Back in Zanzibar, the British didn't waste time. They installed their preferred candidate, Hamoud bin Mohammed, as Sultan by lunchtime. Unlike Khalid, Hamoud played ball. He allowed the British to strengthen their control and move forward with plans to abolish slavery, a goal they'd been pushing for years, and that was the end of the war, at least officially. But here's where things get fuzzy. Ask 10 historians how long the Anglo-Zanzibar War lasted, and you might get 10 different answers. Some say it was over in 38 minutes, others say 40. If you claim 45, the New York Times ran 2 different reports in the months that followed. One said 50 minutes, another 30. So why the confusion? Because nobody was keeping proper time. The big clock tower in town was hit during the shelling, one historian noted. And most people in Zanzibar didn't have watches, so the war with the most precise title, the shortest war in history, might not have had a working clock. Still, the Guinness Book of World Records went with 38 minutes. And that's the number that stuck. For comparison, the next shortest wars, like the 1969 football war between El Salvador and Honduras, lasted several days, and the 6-day war between Israel and neighboring states in 1967, a full week. So yeah, Zanzibar still holds the record. But here's the thing. Military scholars have debated this for years. Was it a coup, an uprising, a colonial crackdown, or just a brief explosion of violence disguised as statecraft? Karl von Clausewitz, the Prussian general who practically wrote the book on war, said that war is an act of violence intended to compel our opponent to fulfill our will. And by that definition, surely, this was war. The British wanted Khalid gone, and he was gone. But it wasn't a war with strategies and fronts and field commanders. It didn't have campaigns. It didn't even have a formal start or end. What it had was a palace, a defiant prince, 5 British warships, and less than an hour of cannon fire. If you enjoyed watching this video, please show support, leave a like, share, and subscribe. And we'll do our best to ensure we're your new favorite history channel now.